This is Jayquan, and this is Foundation Lesson number 52, the Electro Era. Now, a few things to get out of the way first. When I say the Electro Era, electro music is actually still going strong. It morphs into different things and different sounds, but there is still electro in existence right now. But for the time period that it was in its genesis, in my opinion, and for the time period, most importantly for this piece, that it affected hip hop the most, and it was also very much a real part of hip hop, interwoven in hip hop and inspired by hip hop, was around 1980, 1981 through about 1985 or so. To me, that's when it was at its most vibrant, its most influential, and it was at its zenith. Now, other people might have different experiences, but from my recollection and living through the music, it was right around that very early time of the 80s through about the middle part of the 80s when it was most alive to me. Now, this part will be more of a reflection of certain electro records and the artists that created them, more so than a history on the birth of electro and things of that nature, because that's something, we may not ever get a definitive, this is where it was born type of answer for any of this. Electro music is it's electronic music. People have dealt with electronic music for many, many decades. Sly and the Family Stone dealt a lot with drum machines very early on, and they weren't even the first, but that was a very early example of people dealing with drum machines. This music, it was done in Germany, it was done in Miami, Detroit, New York, Los Angeles. It skipped all over the map, the UK. And in addition to those factors as well, it's not really a simple thing to get an easy definition for what the music is. It's one of those things when you hear electro, it's electro. But to say, to be an electro record, it has to fit these particular criterion or this particular parameter it has to fall into, it's really hard to put it in a box like that. What you're going to hear in this case is, music that was made electronically, mainly by drum machines with, synthesizers, very heavy on vocoder. The vocoder is that computer voice, not to be confused with what people like Roger Troutman did, or Peter Frampton or Stevie Wonder did back in the 60s and 70s with the talk box. That was something totally different. And what they do with auto-tune today, totally different than the vocoder. The vocoder is a whole different animal, but basically it's that sound that always sounds like a robot on this music. Now, what you'll also hear in these pieces is a certain tempo, a certain beats per minute. Now, that's not something that's necessary for a record to be electro, for it to be fast, but generally the records were more up-tempo, and even the drum patterns were very similar. And back in the days, it's very popular for DJs and wannabe DJs to make mixes, like mixtapes, a real mixtape where there was really music being mixed on a tape. It was easy to do that back in these days. These are the days where every DJ didn't even have pitch control on his or her turntables. These were the days where you were still slowing the record down with your finger if you didn't have a pitch control turntable, because they were a little more expensive than the standard turntables without pitch control. But these records were easy to mix because the beats per minute generally fell within, a certain framework, and minus a few beats per minute here and there. You just slowed the record down with your finger to make it the beats match or the tempos match. And the mixes were clean mixes because the drum patterns were almost the same drum pattern. Most electro records, now this is not any rule that they have to stick to this, but many of the drum patterns were the boom, pat, boom, boom, pat, boom, boom. That was basically it. Again, there are records that defy that drum pattern that are still considered electro, but most of them will contain either the higher tempo. They all are going to contain a drum machine programming, drum machine production, and synthesizers, just about. Some form of vocoder. They don't have to, but some form of vocoder. And, they were usually, for us, the 80s being a very futuristic time for us. Everything was the future in space, video games, Space Invaders, Galaga. Some people pronounce it Galaga, whichever, you know what I'm talking about. Those games, the music back then, into the 70s, beginning of the 80s, movies like, Star Wars and Buck Rogers and, so many of those records were about the future and space. And many of the electro records, if they weren't about that in the subject matter or the title of them, there was very much this futuristic and spacey feel to them, or a fantasy type feel that was rooted in some kind of futuristic space setting, like a record like Planet Rock or even Electric Kingdom. Many of these records, definitely not all, but many of these records were talking about some distant place, like a utopia. Electric Kingdom, they're talking about, the world you live in is this way, come to Electric Kingdom. Egypt by the Egyptian lover, there's this place, a freaky, kinky nation with a so-so female population. It's different from your world. Planet Rock, come here, it's the short shot. Many times the music was an alternative to the earthly existence that the actual makers of the music actually lived. A group like Nucleus, very much into the space thing. Even my man Cosmo. What's up, Cos? What's up, Cosmo D? My man Cosmo D said, I'm Cosmo D from outer space, came to rock the human race. If you look at the album covers, they were always in space on the album covers, in a spaceship, Johns and crew. Space is the place. Album is called Lost in Space. Again, many of the records did not contain those elements, but most of them contained that feel of, a futuristic utopia that's distant and elsewhere from where we are. Plenty of them was just party records, just happened to use a vocoder and an up-tempo beat, and they was just funky. And again, not all of them were up-tempo. Many of them were mid-tempo. Some of them were slower, and they were still considered electro. So there'll be some disagreement of, well, I don't consider that electro, or that's not really electro, or you didn't mention this and that. But this is from my experience, the music that I remember. There's gonna be at least two parts to this because there's so much and so many records within a short amount of time that were released. And this music, much of it made its way to the radio and made its way to popular culture and to the music charts, but much of it remained underground. But it was good music that represented a good time, made by talented artists. Many one-hit wonders. Many of these records, you never heard from the groups again. Many of them were established groups. I mean, Midnight Star, when they made Freakazoid, and many other records, No Parking on the Dance Floor, Operator, all those records basically use the same template. But Midnight Star was a funk group who had been well established before Freakazoid, but Freakazoid just took them somewhere else. So, you did have your groups who were already well established official groups that dabbled into electro and got, a couple hit records. Group like Daz Band that was on Motown, and they had a song called Joystick, which was very much in the vein of what electro records were, and again dabbled in that arcade culture that was very, very prevalent in that first part of the 80s. So again, I'm not going to bog you down with a bunch of history of in this year this happened and this was the first person to do this, because there is a little more difficulty on getting a definitive timeline for some of this music, because like I said, it was happening in different places almost at the same time, and some of the lines are blurred on who was inspired by who, what was inspired by what. So I'm going to be less heavy-handed on the dates and the places where these things happen. It's going to be more reflective and more kind of just celebratory of a very good music genre that many of us 60s, 70s, and 80s babies really hold dear. All right, so it's impossible to talk about electro music and not talk about Kraftwerk. It's just a matter of fact. And that's the Germany connection that I talked about a few minutes ago. Now, when you say electro music, there are different titles that this music has been given. The one who stuck the most is electro. I've heard Bambaataa and people like that refer to it as electro funk. There are multiple subgenres that came out under electro, but electro music itself, the electro is just short for electronic music. This is not your traditional cats on real drum sets, with trumpets and, a backing horn section and, rhythm guitar and, what a band would have. This is electronic music. This is drum machines and synthesizers primarily. Now, I started with Trans Europe Express because of its importance to the subculture of hip hop and the dancers and the b-boying and the early hip hop parties and things of that nature. That was a definite essential breakbeat to hip hop. And that record was, I believe, 1977. I could have gone back to 1974, 3 years prior to the Autobahn album that Kraftwerk did. But Autobahn can be a hard listen sometimes. I respect Autobahn for what it is to history and to the history of Kraftwerk. But it's a difficult listen for me sometimes. It's almost, at times, sounds like a sound effect record. It's not heavy on drums at all. Very heavy on synthesizers. And it sounds almost like a space sound effects record at times. Not beat heavy at all. Now, the thing that hip hop liked about Trans Europe Express was that it was beat heavy. That beat was, the beat knocked on it. And that's what the musical aspect of hip hop is. It's the beat. Whether it was Kraftwerk, David Bowie, or whatever it was that supposedly or so-called crossed over to black music, it was usually funky and beat heavy. A lot of people at that time, when they thought of Kraftwerk, they didn't really think of the urban audience. But I have an advertisement from the very early part of the 80s, and it's from Warner Brothers Black Music Department. Now, of course, music was very segregated along color lines, even up into the 80s. And, today it's a lot different because of the internet and, just the times that we live in. But still, there exist these different charts. Charts that go all the way back to when they called black music race music. Then you had the R&B charts, the soul charts. At one point there wasn't even a rap chart, even when rap music was popular. So you had all these different charts. And as it was, you had different music departments at these record labels that were a lot of times race-based. So you had a black music department at Warner Brothers. Now, Kraftwerk started out on a label called Vertigo. Then they moved to Capitol. Then they moved to Warner Brothers, and they did most of their recordings for Warner Brothers. But Warner Brothers Black Music Department in the early 80s, they had this advertisement that was in Billboard and different music trade magazines. And they were advertising the offerings in the black music department. They had albums by Prince, albums by The Time, Larry Graham, and they had Kraftwerk's 1981 album on that listing because they knew that Kraftwerk was starting to make noise on the black charts and on black radio. Now, going back to 77 with Trans Europe Express, the record that I said was so monumental as far as hip hop culture and music went, that's a record you would hear different parts of that in later electro records. Even some go-go records would copy Trans Europe Express, particularly that synthesizer line that's in there. And the drum beat will be mimicked somewhat in later records. In 78, The Man Machine was a very popular record. And again, you would hear when the Fearless Four did Rockin' It a couple years later, they used the music from The Man Machine, which again was 1978 from the Man Machine album. But it was that 1981 record with Numbers particularly, but the Computer World album was the one that really cemented things as far as Kraftwerk being embraced by the so-called black community, black radio, underground music. I mean, of course, it was a mainstream hit as well, but it hit really hard in urban areas where it wasn't expected to hit. And that happened a lot with music. I remember reading that Freddie Mercury, the lead singer from Queen, he said he had no idea that his music was popular with the black audience until Another One Bites the Dust, because it hit really high on the soul charts, or whatever the charts were called at that time that reflected urban music. But Queen had a black fan base out of the gate. So many times the labels and others neglected or ignored the fact, or were ignorant of the fact that this music was hitting hard in areas that they didn't necessarily promote heavy in. But if it was funky, then the black community embraced it. Black radio embraced it. And so it was with the Computer World album, and like I said, Numbers particularly. Yeah, Numbers was a very highly influential song. The whole Computer World album, not only was it dope and very creative at the time, it's also stood the test of time. It still sounds good as an album. It's one that, I never used to skip back then. Numbers was definitely my favorite, but I would listen to it in its entirety. Pocket Calculator, Computer World 2, which faded right into Numbers. Numbers is only like 3 minutes long, but it seems like it's like 6.5 minutes because Computer World 2 blends right into Numbers. There wasn't any space between those two records. Computer Love, Home Computer is More Fun to Compute. Everything on the Computer World album was something that it was a mind-blowing album, and it was a sign of things that were to come very soon. The simplicity of it, we didn't even know what they were talking about on the record. We heard 1, 2, but even though it was called Numbers, at the time, everybody didn't necessarily know that these guys were just calling out numbers in different languages. They were counting in different languages. And I guess it should have been obvious. Uno, dos, tres, cuatro, 1, 2, and then the stuff that you might not have been able to make out. But it was just so funky back then. I just don't think we were paying a great amount of attention, at least where I was, to what was being said. It was just funky, and like I said, it was funky. We rocked with it, and that was again the essence of hip hop. Again, there's no people aren't even calling this music or subculture hip hop at this time, but for the purposes of trying to tell this story, I have to say that that's what drew hip hop to many different forms of music. It had to be funky and beat heavy. And as the great Grandmaster Caz, coined a very true and catchy phrase recently where he said hip hop didn't invent anything, hip hop reinvented everything. And that's what was about to happen very soon. Yeah, so like I said in my intro, two things. It's very hard to contain this music to one part of the world. You know, the Yellow Magic Orchestra was from Japan. And the other thing that I said was what we were seeing with these groups was as opposed to a full band with a drummer and all these instruments, 10 and 12 people, Kraftwerk was 4 guys with basically computers, drum machines and synthesizers. And Yellow Magic Orchestra was 3 guys. So you started to see a lot less of traditional frameworks of bands going on here, and just a few guys in a room with computers making music.
Party people, can yo get funky? So Sonic folks, can yo get funky? The Zulu Nation, can yo get funky? Yeah, just hit me. Just taste the funk and hit me. Just get on down and hit me. Bambaata's getting so funky now, hit me. Yeah, just hit me.
It's time to chase your dreams about the seats. Make your body sway, socialize, get down. Let your soul lead the way. Shake it now, go ladies. It's a living dream. Love, life, live. Come play the game. Our world is free. Do what you want, but free. It's a house of both females and males. Both young and old. For the disco, the DJ plays your favorite blast. Takes it back to the past. Music's magic. Poof, hump, hump, bump, get bumped with some blast. People.
Rock the planet, rock. Don't stop. Rock the planet, rock. Don't stop.
The Soul Sonic Force, Mr. Big Power, and MC Glow. We emphasize the show. We got.
Yeah, so that's the one. That's the one that it took it to the urban side of things. 1982. So we're a year past the Computer World album, a few years past Trans Europe Express, which is a record that Bam or Africa Bambaataa helped to popularize amongst other street DJs. But he was one who had a lot of Kraftwerk in his set, from what I'm told. And it was Africa Bambaataa and the Soul Sonic Force, one of his many groups. He had the Cosmic Force and Jazzy 5, which was actually Jazzy J's group. But a lot of groups under his umbrella and his organization, which was the Zulu Nation. Now, as the story goes, and I've talked to most of the players who were right there. As the story goes, Bambaataa, he gets this deal. He hooks up with Tom Silverman of Tommy Boy Records. He says, I want to make an urban electronic record in the vein of Kraftwerk. He gets with Arthur Baker, who's one of the producers. Arthur Baker and John Roby produced the record. And the outcome was Planet Rock. I mean, that's the short story. And you hear the similarities between Planet Rock and Trans Europe Express, as well as numbers. Their pieces in there. There were lawsuits. When Kraftwerk heard the record, of course, they weren't happy with it. So, one of many early hip hop lawsuits. This was 82. So before that, you had, a lawsuit for Rapper's Delight by Sugar Hill Gang from Chic that made Good Times. And you had a few groups sue Sugar Hill for usage of some of the stuff that was in Adventures on the Wheels of Steel by Grandmaster Flash. And this was another very early lawsuit where supposedly Kraftwerk got some publishing points on Planet Rock because that synth line is definitely taken directly from Trans Europe Express, and that's what they were trying to do. They weren't. I'm pretty sure they didn't think they'd get sued, but they weren't trying to hide the fact that they were trying to make a urban version of Trans Europe Express, and that's exactly what they did. The fallout from that record, the influence of that record, you just, if you weren't there, it's very hard to explain it. I know where I was, the cultural part of hip hop, the dancing and the what had been christened breakdancing, or what would be christened breakdancing soon. It was just getting to my area in a major way based on Planet Rock. Now, depending on where you are, as far as geographically, you saw elements of this dancing and stuff that was connected to hip hop. You saw before or even after. But where I am in Virginia, Planet Rock was the record that summer of '82, everybody went out and got their shirts. Everybody tried to get a dance crew. Everybody had their shirts with the iron-on letters, and you would have the name of your crew on the front and your name on the back. And everybody was trying to pop and lock by this time. I won't even say breakdance yet. Nobody was on the floor spinning anything. Everybody was trying to pop and lock, which weren't new dances at the time by any means. We saw Rerun do it on television, and Jeffrey Daniels from Charlemagne was doing an interpolation of a lot of street dancing. And you had the slide, which Michael Jackson later called a moonwalk. You had the backslide. You had all kind of different dances, but we made it a little harder and incorporated a little more of the street part of it once Planet Rock got out or came out. And that was the record that everybody was doing that dance to. It's like that's what really set things in motion as far as the elements of the so-called cultural elements of hip-hop coming together. I say Planet Rock was the beginning of us kind of seeing, okay, there's other things that go along with this rap, because Planet Rock was just so dance-oriented. Other rap records before were dance-oriented, because it all came out of funk and disco anyway. That's what these rap records were emulating, the funk and disco records of the day. But Planet Rock was just so dance oriented. And even though you had the Yellow Magic Orchestra records and you had the Kraftwerk records before, they didn't have any vocals to them. Or the Yellow Magic Orchestra record didn't have any vocals. Kraftwerk's records had vocals, but it was just the vocoder voice. They actually put rhyming in a very unique form of rhyming on this record. Mr. Big, Pow Wow, MC Globe, big up to the Soul Sonic Force. They were doing like a hybrid of harmonizing and rapping on this record. And it's a special record, to this day. So, I remember when it first hit and it played on the radio. And I mean, when I say the radio, I mean like the major radio. It was playing alongside of the Cameos and the Bar-Kays and Diana Ross and whoever had records out that year. It was a major record. Played several times a day. And it was the first time I heard the radio stations actually play every version of a record. Like literally that day or those days of it dropping, the days after it dropped, you would hear Planet Rock, then you would hear the instrumental of Planet Rock. And then Tommy Boy was very famous for having bonus beats, and bonus beats were a very short edit of the actual track from the song. So with Planet Rock, the bonus beats might have been a minute, 2 minutes long, but it was just, one part of the song that they kind of, re-edited a different way. And many of their records that were beat heavy would have a bonus beats. And, I didn't have the record yet. As it was with Planet Rock, the record played, just all day, for the first how many days, for that first week or so that it came out, it's all you heard. The radio stations were playing it a couple times an hour, which was very rare back then. But I didn't know, I could never catch the radio announce the name of the group, so I didn't know what record to look for, and it was blowing my mind because I'm like, well, what's this? I would hear like the bonus beats, then I go back and I hear the instrumental, and the instrumental back then of a song wasn't necessarily just the straight version of the song with the vocals taken out. The instrumental of Planet Rock had extra vocoder stuff, like when they were saying, Dayton Rock to the Planet Rock, Don't Stop, and they naming all these different places. That's not in the vocal version of it. So this is a whole new version. So I've heard at least 3 versions of it, and it's blowing my mind because I'm like, what record is this, and how many damn versions are there of this record? So that was just a very, very it was an exciting time because rap was still only, really about 2, not even 3 years old on record yet. And then here comes this new style of rap, and the music is much more different and more electronic than the stuff that Sugar Hill and Enjoy is doing. So it was a very, very exciting time for music. Now, you would see at the bottom of Planet Rock that it said music by Planet Patrol. And Planet Patrol was, again, it was Arthur Baker and John Roby initially. That's just who Planet Patrol was. But they went and got a group called the Energetics. And if you go to my website, foundationhiphop.com, I have an interview with the Energetics. The Energetics were basically, they're a group out of Boston that modeled themselves around like a Temptations type sound. And they were a straight R&B group. And they got with Arthur Baker, from Boston. And he said, hey, look, I want to kind of change the dynamics of your group, because the Energetics had a record out before, and it was right at the end of disco, and it just, the way that it came out at the wrong time, and it never blew up. So long story short, Arthur Baker said, I want to change the dynamics of your group. I'm going to give you a tape with some music, listen to this music, and I want you to write some songs based around it and see what you can do with it. And originally they didn't like it, because imagine, this is a group who modeled themselves after the Temps and the vocal groups of yesteryear as far as soul music. And what Herb Jackson, the lead singer and basically spokesperson and kind of founder of Planet Patrol, what he told me, he was a member of the Energetics and Planet Patrol once they changed, because a few members didn't go along with the new group Planet Patrol, but he was in the Energetics and Planet Patrol. He told me, when we heard this music, we really thought that our careers were over. Like, it was almost over anyway, because they got dropped from the major label that they recorded for. I forgot what label they were on. It was a major label the Energetics were on, and they were already down about their career, and they were about to give up when Arthur Baker approached them with this. What did Herb call it? He called it space music. He said, we didn't know what to do with this space music, but they all figured it out, and not too long after Planet Rock dropped, we got another banger that was, for some people, it was equally as powerful, if not more powerful, than Planet Rock. Yeah, so Tommy Boy, who released Planet Rock and also released Play at Your Own Risk by Planet Patrol, and that was Atlantic Records that the Energetics recorded for. Again, the Energetics became Planet Patrol. And, what it sounded like with Planet Patrol and Play at Your Own Risk, it sounded like they almost, like it was the Temptations meet, the Soul Sonic Force musically. They were set up, the Energetics or / Planet Patrol was set up vocally like the Temptations. You had a guy that did the real high notes like Eddie Kendricks. You had a guy that sang like Blue with the real deep voice. In fact, the cat's name was Melvin Franklin, and that's the name of the guy from the Temptations who had the really deep voice. They called him Blue. Melvin Franklin, rest in peace. So what a great irony and a coincidence that both of those cats were named Melvin Franklin. They both sang in that deep register like that. But their group was set up like the Temptations, and it sounded like the Temptations meet the Soul Sonic Force. But that's what it was. But again, those were both recordings on Tommy Boy Records. Tommy Boy would be one of the leaders of Electro. But the independent labels are definitely the engine to what kept electro music going. You had Sunny View Records with sound makers. You had Fantasy Records, which was the old jazz label. They were still doing records. You had Cutting Records. And then the majors started to get in on it. Like I said, groups like Midnight Star started to make electro records, and even Sugar Hill. Everybody had to succumb to that. Everybody saw that, okay, this is the new craze. We got to get that sound and cash in on that sound. Now, this music will be pretty much chronological. Just the way my mind is wired, I do everything as chronological as possible. Now, it won't be chronological down to the year. I might play a song that came out in 83, and then you might come back and hear something after that came out in 82. But again, you got to remember, this music for the era that I'm capturing, that very early part of the 80s through the mid 80s, was only a 5 or 6 year window that I'm really covering. So for the impact of the music and what it was, even if it's not chronological down to the year, for the time frame, is all very relative, because everybody was kind of bouncing off what each other did at that time.
Ready, 1, 2, 3, 4.
Yeah, this is all high energy dance music, and this was the music that was the soundtrack to what the again, the people who were rechristened breakdancers by mainstream media originally were called b-boys. This is the music that they dance to. Now, you know, from my research and talking to the people who were there, you know, the dancers who were the original, you know, element of hip hop, along with the DJ. You know, the DJ played the music that he played, the break beats, for the dancers to actually go off and do their dance to this particular part of the record that was a breakdown. This is long before the music I'm talking about right now. That was the original music, the original soundtrack for the original b-boys. Now, once the art of b-boying kind of went to sleep or was kind of passe, you know, by the time the Wild Style came out, I've talked to most of the people who were involved in Wild Style, including the director Charlie Ahern. And when he was going around, you know, telling people that he was making this movie and he was putting b-boying in it, you know, he was getting laughed at because b-boying was seen as something that was played out, you know, in the hood at this point. And from what I've gathered, the original b-boys were largely black cats in these urban neighborhoods, in the Bronx and other parts of New York. The original dance, even, you know, you would hear Crazy Legs from a Rock Steady Crew, who is basically, you know, he's like the face. He's been the modern day face of that dance, b-boying / breakdancing for decades. But he says the original style was definitely the style before people hit the floor. You know, the top rocking or whatever, before anybody was hitting any linoleum and scuffing their knees up. It was these black cats in the hood that originated that. The soundtrack for those guys was the Mexican and all those break beats that would be remanufactured over all these years to make this backdrop musically of what we call hip hop. But the second resurgence of breakdancing was definitely led by the Latino cats, the Rock Steady Crew, and many others who resurrected the dance. Now, that's the history that I've gotten. But as far as the music goes, this music was more the soundtrack for that second resurgence of b-boying that, again, was called breakdancing by the mainstream. And that's when the movies started to come out, you know, Breakin' and Beat Street and all those movies. And the soundtrack was this kind of music, you know, Kraftwerk and, you know, the kind of music I'm playing right now. This is when it hit the rest of the country. This is when the rest of the country and then overseas, they, you know, you start seeing cats putting the cardboard down, and everywhere you go, people are trying to break and pop. And this is the music that they're doing it to. So when I hear a song like Hip Hop Bebop by Man Parrish, the first thing I can see in my head is people breaking to that song, because that was a very popular breaking song. Again, songs like Al Nafish by Hashim, Clear by Cybertron, very popular. But that, again, second resurgence of the dance, which was called breakdancing at that point in this early part of the 80s. You got to realize also this music runs parallel with, you know, Run DMC's first few records. You know, everything I just played was basically 83. We're only a year past Planet Rock. And, you know, all this music kind of meshes and melts into each other. The first rap recordings, 79, 80, 81, very disco influenced. They're taking popular records that are on the radio, popular break beats and popular disco records, and they're recreating these records with bands. And cats are rapping over them. Run DMC comes, they take it back to the park sound of stripped down rhyming, but they're doing it over just drum machines. The drum machine and the MCs. They change the landscape with that. Well, right around that time, the year before they do that, Planet Rock is huge. So Planet Rock is still huge by the time Run DMC comes out. And if you listen to It's Like That, the drum pattern is a slowed down version of Planet Rock. If you go back and listen to It's Like That, it's boom, 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 which is basically Planet Rock slowed down. And Larry Smith, the producer of that, has stated that publicly. With the few interviews that he's given, he stated that was motivated or inspired, is a better word, by Planet Rock. It's Like That was. So all this music is existing at the same time. One is coming out of the other, and they're existing at the same time. Now, as far as Clear, by Cybertron. Cybertron, that's a cat. Warren Atkins is out of Detroit. So that goes back to, I'm saying that this music was created by different musicians in different parts of the world. Hashem Al Nafish, huge record, huge in the as far as cutting and scratching in what they call now the turntablism community. You know, cats like Cash Money and others have made that record part of routines that are legendary in the different DJ competitions. People have routines where they take 2 copies of Al Nafish because there's 3 or 4 different versions of that song. Again, these bonus beats, they all basically will have the same drum beat, but one may start with Just Feel It. You know, that's a little computer voice says Just Feel It. And people were cutting up the just from Just Feel It. Or they would cut up It's Time, which is another intro on another version of the song. So that record, you know, many DJs bought several different copies. I mean, I probably have 10 copies of it in my collection just because from cutting and scratching, I just wore out, you know, those particular parts of the record and just had to buy another. Or I would just see one and just because it's Al Nafish and it's $1 or $2, you know, pick it up. I got one in the dollar bins a couple months ago. So I got at least 10 copies of that. I know there's a lot of cats who are in that same boat as I am. Al Nafish was a great record, very different. Again, you can see that the template is heavy synthesizers and just the drum machine programming, just incredible. Clear, another song, just like Nafish, where not many vocal parts, but the vocal parts, you don't really know what they're talking about on the song. It's hard to say what the song is about. And that was secondary to us. We didn't really necessarily care if we could sing along or if the song was about anything. The song sounded good and it felt good. The DJs could mix it. You could rhyme over it if you so chose. But those were songs that people loved to dance to. And the DJs loved to mix those songs. And they were huge songs at the time. Huge on the late night mixes on the weekends on the radio, and huge on those mixtapes that the DJs and just the regular cats would put together when they were putting their little playlists of records together. And I can't stress enough that these records existed alongside our favorite rap songs. Some of these songs actually had rap versions to them, like a record like Soul Makusa, which was a remix of Manu Dibango's record. By Nairobi. Nairobi is John Roby, who co-produced Planet Rock. He made his own group called Nairobi, and it's basically just him on production. And he made a song called Soul Makusa, where there's a rap version of it. I played hip hop bebop earlier. There's a song called a Bebop Rock, which is a rap version of that, put out by the same label, same producers, but generally many of these songs were basically instrumentals with just vocals sprinkled throughout. And these songs lived and existed on the same tapes and in the same spaces with your Run DMC songs and your Fat Boy songs. And even though it was kind of a different thing, you know, a different genre, still basically fell under rap, and we didn't really treat it much differently. It was all under the rap music umbrella.